The emergency board meeting started at 3:47 a.m. I sat in my home office, watching my phone light up with 17 missed calls from Julian, knowing exactly what was happening 3 miles away in the Vortex Data Systems headquarters. Their entire $850 million database infrastructure was crumbling in real time. Every client portal, every data pipeline, every security protocol, vanishing like smoke. And I was the only person on Earth who could stop it. I took a sip of my coffee and let it ring. Before we dive into how a single line of code I wrote 10 years ago brought a billion-dollar company to its knees, I want to ask you something. If you appreciate stories about standing up to corporate corruption and protecting the people who actually do the work, consider subscribing. We're building a community here, working our way to 5,000 subscribers who believe loyalty and competence matter more than nepotism. Hit that subscribe button and let's grow together. My name is Kira Westfield, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Vortex Data Systems. Or at least, I was until approximately 4 hours ago when I submitted my resignation via email at 11:43 p.m. I didn't come from money or connections. My parents ran a small bookstore in Ohio, the kind that barely survived Amazon's rise but taught me something more valuable than any MBA program: how to understand people who work hard for everything they have. My mom would let customers run tabs during tough months. My dad would stay late to special order books for kids who couldn't afford the best sellers. They understood empathy not as a concept, but as a practice, and they raised me to recognize it in others. That's why when I met Amelia Zhang 20 years ago at a tech conference in Austin, I knew immediately she was someone worth building something with. Amelia wasn't like the other software architects at that conference. While everyone else was networking aggressively, trading business cards like currency, she was sitting alone at the hotel bar, sketching database schemas on cocktail napkins. I walked over, looked at her designs, and said the first thing that came to mind. That's a beautiful solution, but you're going to hit a bottleneck at scale when the query load exceeds your indexing capacity. She looked up at me, pushed her glasses up her nose, and smiled. I know, that's why there's a second napkin. She slid over another napkin, showing the exact caching solution I would have suggested. We talked until 4 in the morning. 3 months later, we co-founded Vortex Data Systems in her garage with $23,000 in combined savings and a dream of building data infrastructure that actually worked. The first 5 years were brutal. We lived on ramen and ambition, taking contracts that barely covered rent, building our reputation one satisfied client at a time. Amelia handled the architecture. She could see system designs in her mind like three-dimensional puzzles. I handled the implementation and security, turning her visions into code that couldn't be broken. We made a perfect team. We also made a perfect company. By year 7, we had 40 employees and 12 major clients. By year 10, we had 200 employees and contracts with half the Fortune 500. By year 15, we were the third largest data infrastructure company in the Midwest with offices in 8 states. Amelia was CEO, I was CTO, and we had never forgotten what it felt like to be two people with nothing but talent and determination. We paid our developers above market rate. We offered unlimited sick leave. We promoted from within. When Kyle Henderson, one of our junior programmers, had a family emergency and needed 3 months off, Amelia didn't just approve it. She sent his family flowers and kept his full salary running. When our head of security, Monica Reeves, came out as transgender, we didn't just accept it. We made sure our healthcare covered every aspect of her transition and updated our company policies to protect people like her. This wasn't charity. This was remembering where we came from. But success attracts attention, and attention attracts sharks. 4 years ago, we made the decision that would eventually destroy everything we built. We needed capital to expand into cloud services. The technology was evolving fast, and staying competitive meant a massive infrastructure investment we couldn't fund through revenue alone. We needed investors. Amelia was reluctant. I was reluctant. But our CFO, Thomas Brighton, made a compelling case. We could take on private equity, maintain majority control through a dual-class share structure, and get the $200 million we needed to dominate the cloud market. "You'll still run the company," Thomas assured us over dinner at that steakhouse downtown. The board will be mostly advisory. Standard stuff. Standard stuff. Those words should have been a red flag the size of Texas. We signed the deal with Redstone Capital Partners. They got 40% equity and 3 seats on our 7-person board. We kept 4 seats: Amelia, myself, Thomas, and Howard Chen, our longtime legal counsel. Howard had been with us since year 3, when we could barely afford to pay him. He'd taken reduced fees in exchange for a small equity stake because he believed in us. The Redstone partners seemed reasonable at first. There was Diane Foster, a former tech executive with an impressive resume. There was Martin Cross, a finance guy who mostly stayed quiet and reviewed spreadsheets. And there was Julian's uncle, Richard Carlisle, the managing partner who'd led the deal. Richard was smooth. Too smooth. He had that effortless charisma of people who'd never been told no in their entire lives, the kind of man who'd inherited his father's investment firm and genuinely believed his success was entirely self-made. He spoke in buzzwords and corporate platitudes, the kind of empty language that sounds profound until you actually parse what's being said. But for the first 2 years, everything was fine. The board meetings were boring in the best way. We'd present our quarterly numbers, which were always good, and everyone would nod approvingly. Redstone got their returns, we got our autonomy. The company grew. Then, 3 months ago, Richard brought his nephew to a board meeting. Julian Carlisle was 26 years old. He had an MBA from a school his family had donated to, 2 years of experience at a consulting firm where he'd produced exactly 0 tangible results, and the kind of confidence that comes from never experiencing real consequences. He wore expensive suits that fit perfectly, styled his hair with products that probably cost more than our junior developers made in a week, and spoke about synergistic disruption without a trace of irony. Julian's been learning the ropes in tech investment, Richard announced at that October board meeting, his hand on his nephew's shoulder with obvious pride. I thought he should sit in, get a sense of how a successful portfolio company operates. Amelia and I exchanged a glance across the table. We'd seen this movie before, but Julian was just observing, so we let it slide. He spent that entire meeting on his phone, barely looking up except to ask one question. Have you guys considered pivoting to AI? Monica, our head of security who was presenting on our latest encryption protocols, paused mid-sentence. Our business is data infrastructure, she explained patiently. AI utilizes infrastructure, but we're not an AI company. Julian nodded like she'd said something profound, then went back to his phone. After the meeting, Amelia and I grabbed coffee at the shop across from our building. That kid's going to be a problem, Amelia said, stirring sugar into her espresso. He's just sitting in, I replied. Rich uncle showing the nephew how business works. He'll get bored in a month. Amelia shook her head, staring out the window at the Vortex building we'd built from nothing. Richard doesn't do anything without a reason. And did you see how he looked at our numbers? Not impressed. Calculating? We grew 34% year over year. Our client retention is 96%. What's there to calculate? Whether we're growing fast enough for them. Amelia turned back to me. Private equity doesn't care about sustainable growth, Kira. They care about maximum return on their timeline, not ours. She was right. She was always right about these things. The next month, Julian attended another meeting. And the month after that. By January, Richard made it official. Julian was joining the board as a 4th Redstone representative. Wait, Howard interjected, flipping through the shareholders' agreement. The deal specifies 3 Redstone seats. We're invoking the expansion clause, Richard said smoothly. Section 7.3. If Redstone increases their investment by $50 million or more, they're entitled to an additional board seat. You're investing another $50 million? Amelia asked. We believe in Vortex's potential, Richard smiled. Consider it a vote of confidence. It wasn't a vote of confidence. It was a power play. With 4 seats to our 4, every vote would be a tie, giving Richard effective veto power over any major decision. But the contract was clear, and Howard confirmed the clause was ironclad. Julian joined the board. His first official act was to question why our developer salaries were above market rate. We pay competitively to attract and retain the best talent, I explained. But you could save $4 million annually by adjusting to market median, Julian said. reading from a spreadsheet he'd clearly had someone else prepare. That's $4 million in additional profit. That's $4 million in destroying morale and losing our best people, Amelia countered. Our low turnover rate saves us more than that in recruitment and training costs. Has that been quantified? Julian asked. 20 years of running a successful company has quantified it, Amelia said, her voice getting that edge I recognized as barely controlled anger. Richard smoothly intervened, suggesting we table the discussion and gather more data. The motion died, but the message was sent. Julian was here to change things. Over the next 2 months, he questioned everything. Why did we offer unlimited sick leave? Why were we paying for Monica's health care? Why hadn't we automated more positions? Why were we still promoting from within instead of bringing in top talent? Every question was phrased as innocent curiosity, but every question attacked the fundamental values Amelia and I had built the company on. The breaking point came in March. Amelia and I were in her office, reviewing the specs for our new cloud security platform, a 2-year project that would cement our position as industry leaders. We'd invested millions in development, and early testing showed it was going to be revolutionary. Thomas knocked and entered, his face pale. "We need to talk about the board meeting tomorrow." "What about it?" Amelia asked. Thomas closed the door behind him and sat down heavily. "Richard called me this morning. He has the votes to pass a major restructuring proposal." My stomach dropped. "What kind of restructuring?" Thomas pulled out a document and slid it across Amelia's desk. As we read, the room seemed to get colder. The proposal was titled Organizational Optimization and Leadership Renewal. Corporate speak for a purge. It called for transitioning legacy leadership into advisory roles and bringing in fresh perspective to accelerate growth. In plain English, they were going to force Amelia out as CEO. The proposal named Julian as the new Chief Operating Officer, with a clear path to CEO succession within 6 months. It thanked Amelia for her foundational contributions and offered her a consulting position at half her current salary with no operational authority. 20 years of her life building this company from nothing, and they were offering her a consulting gig and a thank you card. "This is insane," I said. "She's the CEO and founder. We control 4 board seats." "Read the next page," Thomas said quietly. The next page outlined the vote. Redstone's 4 seats, Richard, Diane, Martin, and Julian were voting yes. That was expected. What wasn't expected was the 5th yes vote. Thomas Brighton, our own CFO. Amelia looked up at Thomas, betrayal written across her face. "They're offering me CEO," Thomas said, not meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry, Amelia, but this is the opportunity of a lifetime. And honestly, the company needs new energy. You've done amazing things, but maybe it's time to let someone else take it to the next level." New energy. The same phrase Julian had been using for months. "Get out," Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Amelia, let's be professional about, get the fuck out of my office." Thomas left. Amelia and I sat in silence for a long moment. "We still have 4 votes, I finally said. "You, me, Howard, and—" "Wait, who's our 4th? Amelia closed her eyes. "I gave Thomas a board seat last year, remember? When he negotiated that favorable credit line, I thought he'd earned it." She'd given him her 2nd seat, keeping 1 for herself, which meant our side only had 3 votes, Amelia, me, and Howard. We'd lost before the meeting even started. "There has to be something we can do," I said. "Challenge the vote, call a shareholder meeting something." Howard worked through the night reviewing every line of our corporate documents. At 6 a.m., he called with the answer we'd dreaded. "It's legal. The board has authority to remove executive officers with a simple majority. As founder, Amelia can't be removed from the board itself without cause, but her CEO position can be voted away. And there's nothing we can do? Legally. No, the vote is tomorrow at 2 p.m., and unless someone changes their mind, Amelia's out." I sat with Amelia in her office that morning, watching the sun rise over the city we'd conquered together. "I'm not going quietly," Amelia said. "I know. 20 years, Kira. 20 years we built this. We treated people right. We built something that mattered. And they're just taking it. I know." She turned to me, and I saw something I'd never seen in Amelia's eyes before: defeat. "Maybe Thomas is right. Maybe I am legacy leadership. Maybe—" "Don't," I cut her off. Don't you dare. You're the smartest person I've ever met. This company exists because of you. Those 600 employees have jobs because of you. And some spoiled trust fund kid and a traitor CFO don't get to rewrite that story. Then, what do? I thought about my parents' bookstore. How my dad had dealt with a landlord who tried to triple their rent to force them out and bring in a corporate chain. He couldn't outbid the chain. He couldn't negotiate with the landlord. But he'd found something in the original lease, a clause about historical preservation that the landlord had forgotten about. The building was old enough to qualify, and the application process took 3 years. By then, the chain had moved on, and the landlord was happy to keep my dad as a tenant. Sometimes you can't win by being stronger. Sometimes you have to be smarter. I need to make a call, I said. I spent the rest of the day in my office with the door locked, reviewing code I'd written a decade ago. Code that had been sleeping in our system architecture since 2014, waiting for a day I'd hoped would never come. When Amelia and I had first built Vortex, we'd been paranoid about security. Not just external security, internal security. We'd read too many stories about founders getting forced out of their own companies, about hostile takeovers, about partners who'd built something valuable only to have it stolen. So I'd built insurance. Buried deep in the core architecture of every system we'd ever designed, hidden behind layers of standard-looking code and disguised as routine maintenance functions, was a kill switch. Not a destructive one. I wasn't trying to destroy anything, but a reversible dependency lock. Every major system Vortex had built for ourselves, and our clients was designed around proprietary modules that only I fully understood. To anyone else reviewing the code, they looked like standard optimizations. But they were actually intricate dependencies that required specific authentication keys to function. Keys that only existed in my personal encrypted drives. Without those keys, the systems would slowly degrade. Error rates would climb. Performance would tank. Within 72 hours, everything would be non-functional. But it was all reversible. Plug in the authentication keys, and everything would restore perfectly. I told Amelia about it years ago, during the early days when we were still just 2 people in a garage. "Is that legal?" she'd asked. "It's our code in our company," I'd replied. "And I'll remove it once we're established enough that no one can take this from us." But I'd never removed it. And as we'd grown, as we'd built systems for hundreds of clients, those hidden dependencies had spread throughout everything Vortex touched. Our entire business was built on an architecture that only I could fully maintain. I'd forgotten about it, honestly. It had been so long, and we'd been so successful, that the paranoid precautions of 2 scared founders had faded from relevance. Until now. The board meeting started at 2 p.m. sharp. We gathered in the main conference room on the 14th floor, the room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the room where we'd celebrated every major milestone of the company's history. Richard called the meeting to order with characteristic smoothness. "Thank you all for being here. We have important business to discuss today regarding the future leadership structure of Vortex Data Systems." Amelia sat perfectly still, her face unreadable. Richard presented the restructuring proposal. He used words like innovation, market dynamics, stakeholder value, and strategic repositioning. He talked about Amelia's incredible legacy and how grateful everyone was for her foundational work. He never once mentioned that Julian had less experience than most of our junior developers, or that Thomas had been planning this betrayal for months. When Richard finished, he opened the floor for discussion. "I have something to say," Amelia stood up. "I built this company from nothing. Kira and I started with $23,000 and a dream. We've grown it into a $2 billion enterprise with 600 employees and industry-leading technology. Our client satisfaction is 98%. Our employee retention is the best in the industry. We're profitable, growing, and positioned for long-term success." She paused, looking at each board member in turn. "You want to replace me with someone who's never built anything, never struggled for anything, never earned anything beyond his last name. Julian, no offense, but you have no idea how to run this company." "None taken," Julian said with a smile that made me want to throw something. "But that's exactly why fresh perspective is valuable. You're too close to the old ways of doing things. The old ways that built a billion-dollar company. The old ways that are leaving money on the table, Julian countered. We could be growing 60%, not 34%. We could be automating more, cutting costs, maximizing efficiency. But you're too emotionally attached to legacy employees and outdated policies. I'm emotionally attached to treating people with basic human decency. And that's admirable, Richard interjected smoothly. But Julian has a point about growth potential. The market is evolving, and we need leadership that can evolve with it. Leadership like someone who's never led anything? I spoke up for the first time. Richard turned to me with a patient smile. Kira, no one's questioning your technical abilities. You'll remain as CTO, of course. We're only discussing the CEO position. For now, I said. Something in my tone made Richard pause. What does that mean? It means I know how this works. First, you remove Amelia, then you'll come after me, then everyone else who actually knows how to run this company. You'll gut everything we built and extract maximum value before moving on to your next acquisition. That's quite an accusation, Diane spoke up. She'd been mostly quiet through the whole discussion, but now she looked uncomfortable. We're trying to strengthen the company, not destroy it. Are you? I turned to her. Diane, you used to run engineering at a company Richard's firm acquired. What happened after the restructuring? She didn't answer. They cut R&D by 60%, automated half the workforce, and sold the company for parts within 18 months, I continued. Is that the plan here? Every situation is different, Richard said, his smooth tone finally showing some edge. And this discussion is getting off track. We have a proposal on the table. Let's vote. The vote was exactly what we'd expected. Richard, Diane, Martin, Julian, and Thomas voted yes. Amelia, Howard, and I voted no. 5-3. Amelia Zhang, after 20 years of building Vortex data systems from a garage startup to an industry leader, was out as CEO. Thomas was named interim CEO. Julian was named COO with succession rights. Amelia was offered her consulting position. I decline, Amelia said quietly. If I'm not wanted as CEO, I'm not wanted at all. I'll clear out my office today. She walked out of the conference room with her head high. I followed her. We spent the afternoon packing up her office in silence. 20 years of awards, photos, and memories going into boxes. When we finished, we sat on her couch one last time. What are you going to do? She asked me. I don't know yet. You should stay. Thomas and Julian are idiots, but you're brilliant. The company still needs you. The company they're turning it into doesn't need anyone but consultants and yes men. Amelia smiled sadly. Probably true. She stood up and looked around her empty office one last time. Take care of yourself, Kira, and thank you for everything. She left carrying a single box of personal items. Security would ship the rest. I went back to my office and started reviewing code. Over the next week, I watched Julian and Thomas begin their transformation of Vortex. They brought in a consultant, some 24-year-old from Stanford who'd never written production code in his life, to assess our technical efficiency. The consultant, Blake Morrison, spent 3 days interviewing our senior developers and then produced a report recommending we modernize our development approach by outsourcing 40% of our programming to contractors and implementing AI-assisted code generation. Our lead developer, Zoe Patterson, came to my office after reading the report. This is insane, she said, slapping the document on my desk. AI-assisted code generation for security infrastructure? Does this kid understand what we do? He understands cost-cutting, I replied. Half of these recommendations would introduce massive security vulnerabilities, and outsourcing our core development, we'd lose all our institutional knowledge. I know. So you'll stop it, right? You're CTO. You have authority over technical decisions. I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to tell her I'd protect the team and the technology we'd built, but I'd seen the writing on the wall. Zoe, you should update your resume. Her face fell. It's that bad? It's going to get worse. She left, and I went back to my code review. The kill switch I'd built a decade ago was more comprehensive than I'd even remembered. Every major system had dependencies on my proprietary modules. Client data management systems, security protocols, cloud infrastructure, API frameworks, all of it tied back to authentication keys only I possessed. I'd built it as insurance against external threats, but it worked just as well against internal ones. The second week after Amelia's removal, Julian called an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the main cafeteria, 600 people who'd built Vortex into what it was. Julian stood at the front, smiling that confident smile, and announced the new direction. "We're entering an exciting new chapter," he began. "For too long, Vortex has been held back by outdated thinking and resistance to change. Under my leadership, we're going to unlock our true potential." He outlined his vision: aggressive automation, contractor replacement of full-time developers, market rate optimization of salaries, which everyone understood meant cuts, reduction of benefits, performance-based evaluation of all staff, which everyone understood meant firings. I watched Monica, our head of security, close her eyes. I watched Kyle, the developer Amelia had supported through his family emergency, shake his head. I watched Zoe pull out her phone, probably opening LinkedIn. This was the team that had built something incredible, and Julian was going to dismantle it for quarterly returns. "I know change is hard," Julian continued, "but I'm asking everyone to embrace this new energy, adapt or, frankly, make room for those who will." After the meeting, my office had a steady stream of visitors. Every senior leader, every longtime employee, everyone who'd been there through the real building of this company. They all asked the same question: "What do we do?" I gave them all the same answer: "Update your resumes and start looking. This isn't the company we built anymore." That night, I sat in my home office, staring at the code on my screen. The kill switch, the insurance policy, the nuclear option. If I activated it, the entire Vortex infrastructure would begin degrading within hours. Every client system, every internal platform, everything we'd built would slowly stop working. It would be chaos. It would be devastating. It would also be reversible, but only by me. I thought about Amelia, who'd given 20 years to building something meaningful. I thought about Monica, Kyle, Zoe, and the hundreds of other people who'd believed in the company we'd created. I thought about my parents' bookstore and the landlord who tried to force them out. Sometimes you can't win by being stronger. Sometimes you have to be smarter. But this wasn't just about being smart. This was about burning down everything I'd helped build. Yes, I could rebuild it. Yes, I could use it as leverage. But activating the kill switch meant destroying the current version of Vortex and potentially hurting the clients who relied on us. I closed my laptop and went to bed. I wasn't ready to make that decision. The decision made itself a week later. I arrived at the office on a Tuesday morning to find a termination letter on my desk. Effective immediately, I was being removed as CTO for strategic differences with new leadership direction. I was offered a severance package of 6 months' salary in exchange for signing a non-compete agreement and confidentiality clause. Julian and Thomas had made their move. I walked to Thomas's office, what used to be Amelia's office, and found them both there, along with their consultant Blake. "You're firing me," I said flatly. "We're transitioning to new technical leadership," Thomas corrected. "Blake will be taking over as CTO." I looked at Blake, who had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "You have 3 years of experience and you've never managed a team larger than 5 people, I said to him. "I have fresh perspective," Blake replied, echoing Julian's favorite phrase. "And you think you can maintain Vortex's systems with fresh perspective?" "I've reviewed the architecture," Blake said, with the confidence of someone who has no idea what they don't know. "It's fairly standard infrastructure. Nothing we can't handle." I almost laughed. "Have you reviewed the core authentication modules?" "The what?" "The proprietary authentication modules that control system access and data flow across all platforms." Blake pulled out his laptop and started searching through documentation. "I don't see any proprietary modules. All the authentication appears to be standard OAuth and JWT implementations." "Exactly," I said. Julian frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you're about to find out why institutional knowledge matters." I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard Thomas call my name, but I didn't stop. I went to my office, grabbed the few personal items I kept there, and left the building for the last time. At 11:43 p.m. that night, sitting in my home office, I submitted my formal resignation via email. No notice period. No transition plan. Just a simple statement that I was exercising my right to immediate resignation under Section 12 of my employment contract. Then I opened my encrypted drive, located the authentication keys that held the entire Vortex infrastructure together, and moved them to an isolated offline storage device. And I waited. The first system failures started at 6:23 a.m. the next morning. Nothing dramatic, just a slight increase in error rates across client portals. The kind of thing that might be a random glitch. By 8:47 a.m., the error rates had tripled. Client complaints started coming in. By 10:15 a.m., major systems were running at 40% efficiency. By noon, the client data management platform went down entirely. By 2 p.m., everything was failing. The emergency board meeting was called for 3:47 a.m. the next morning. That's when systems that serve global clients go critical. When Europe is starting their business day and Asia is still running, and you can't afford any more downtime. I sat in my home office, watching my phone light up with Julian's calls and let it ring. At 4:23 a.m., Richard himself called. I answered. "Kira, thank God, we need you to come in immediately. Everything is falling apart." "I don't work there anymore, Richard, remember? We can discuss your termination. It was premature. We acted hastily. You fired me and tried to replace me with a consultant who didn't even know our core systems existed. We made a mistake. Name your price. Stock options, salary, whatever you want, but we need you to fix this now." "What's wrong with Blake? Fresh perspective not solving the problem?" There was a long pause. "Blake quit 4 hours ago. He said the systems are fundamentally broken and beyond his ability to repair." "They're not broken, they're locked." Another pause. "What does that mean?" "It means when Amelia and I built this company, we built in protections. The core architecture requires authentication keys to function, keys that only I have." I could hear Richard's breathing get heavier. "That's corporate sabotage. That's insurance against exactly what you did. You forced out the founder and tried to gut the company for parts. The architecture is simply reverting to its protected state. Kira, we have 600 employees and hundreds of clients depending on these systems. Whatever issues we have, those people don't deserve to suffer." He was right about that. This wasn't about hurting employees or clients. This was about leverage. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to call another board meeting for 9 a.m. today. You're going to bring Amelia back as CEO with full authority and a contract that can't be broken. You're going to remove Julian from the board and from any operational role. You're going to restore every policy and benefit that he and Thomas tried to cut. And you're going to fire Thomas." "That's impossible. We can't just. You have about 48 hours before the system degradation becomes permanent. After that, even I won't be able to restore it without rebuilding from scratch, which would take months and cost hundreds of millions in lost business and client lawsuits. So actually, it's very possible. It's your only option. This is extortion. This is the consequence of betrayal. Call the meeting, Richard. You have until 9 a.m. I hung up. At 5:12 a.m., Howard called me. "Please tell me you know what you're doing," he said. "I know exactly what I'm doing." "Richard is threatening legal action. He says you've sabotaged company systems." "The systems aren't sabotaged. They're functioning exactly as designed. As CTO, I had full authority over technical architecture. Everything I built was documented and legal." "Documented where?" "Blake said he couldn't find any reference to these authentication modules. They're documented in technical specifications that were filed with the company's IP portfolio 10 years ago. They're completely legitimate proprietary technology." Howard was quiet for a moment. "You've been planning this for 10 years? I've been protecting us for 10 years. I just never thought I'd have to use it." "Amelia needs to know. Can I tell her what's happening?" "Tell her to expect a call from Richard in the next hour." At 6:45 a.m., Amelia called me. "Richard just offered me my CEO position back." "Good. Kira, what did you do?" I explained the kill switch, the authentication keys, and the ultimatum I'd given Richard. When I finished, Amelia was silent for a long moment. "You built a dead man's switch into our entire company." "I built protection." "It's brilliant. It's also completely insane." "Probably both. What do you want me to do?" "Go to that meeting. Get your company back, get everything in writing, and don't negotiate. They need us more than we need them." "What about you? Are you coming back?" I thought about that. Did I want to go back to Vortex after everything that had happened? Did I want to work with a board that had proven they'd throw away loyalty for quarterly returns? That depends on what happens in the meeting, I said. The board meeting started at 9 a.m. Amelia called me at 10:30 a.m. It's done. Everything? Everything. I'm CEO with a 5-year guaranteed contract. Julian is out. Richard agreed to remove him from the board and the company entirely. Thomas is fired. All the policy changes are reversed. And they're selling their board seats. What? Howard found a buyer. Another investment firm that actually understands long-term value. Redstone is selling all 4 seats to them for a significant profit, so Richard gets to save face with his partners. The new firm wants to keep things stable, not disrupt them. It was better than I'd hoped for. What about the systems? Amelia asked. I'll restore them. It'll take about 6 hours to input all the authentication keys and rebuild the connections. Everything will be back to normal by tonight. And what about you? Are you coming back? I thought about my parents' bookstore. How they'd fought to keep it, not because it made them rich, but because it mattered. Because treating people right and building something meaningful was worth fighting for. Vortex could be that again. Without Julian, Thomas, and Redstone, it could go back to being the company Amelia and I had dreamed of in that garage 20 years ago. Yeah, I said, I'm coming back. I spent that afternoon in the Vortex server room, methodically restoring every authentication key. One by one, the systems came back online. Error rates dropped, performance restored. By 8 p.m., everything was functioning normally. The next morning, Amelia called another all-hands meeting. The cafeteria was packed again, but this time the mood was different. Hopeful instead of anxious. I know the last few weeks have been chaotic, Amelia began. Leadership changed, then changed back. Systems went down. There's been a lot of uncertainty. I want to address all of that directly. She explained what had happened, the board's attempt to force her out, the installation of Julian and Thomas, and their plan to gut the company's culture and benefits. But here's what they didn't understand, Amelia continued. This company isn't just infrastructure and code. It's people. It's the culture we've built together, and you can't outsource that or automate it or optimize it away. She looked across the crowd and found me standing in the back. Kiera and I started this company 20 years ago because we believed technology should be built by people who care about people. That hasn't changed. That will never change. The board members who forgot that are gone. The leadership that tried to tear us apart is gone. What remains is what always mattered us. The room erupted in applause. After the meeting, I went back to my office, my restored office, and found Zoe waiting for me. I heard you're the reason everything crashed, she said. Where'd you hear that? Monica told Kyle, who told everyone else. You built a kill switch into the whole company? I built protection. Zoe grinned. That's the most paranoid and brilliant thing I've ever heard. Also, I'm stealing that idea for my next project. Please don't create more kill switches. Too late. Already planning it? She left and I sat down at my desk, looking out at the city skyline. Vortex was safe. Amelia was back. The people who tried to destroy what we'd built were gone. But something had changed. I'd always believed that doing good work and treating people right was enough. That merit and loyalty would win out. The last few weeks had taught me differently. Sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to burn it all down to protect it. Sometimes loyalty requires leverage. 3 months later, Vortex was thriving again. The new board members, from a firm called Lighthouse Capital, were everything Redstone hadn't been. They cared about sustainable growth, employee satisfaction, and long-term value. They asked intelligent questions and trusted us to run the company we'd built. Julian, I heard through the industry grapevine, had taken a position at another tech company. He lasted 6 months before being quietly let go for performance issues. Apparently, nepotism only carries you so far. Thomas had a harder time. Word spread quickly about why he'd been fired from Vortex, and his reputation took a hit. Last I heard, he was working at a mid-tier consulting firm, several steps down from CEO of a billion-dollar company. Richard and Redstone Capital made a healthy profit on their investment, so they had no complaints. They moved on to their next acquisition, probably already planning how to extract maximum value. As for the kill switch, I told Amelia we should remove it now that we were safe. Absolutely not, she said firmly. Keep it in place. Just in case. You want me to keep a potentially catastrophic failsafe in our production systems? I want you to keep insurance. We got complacent once. Let's not make that mistake again. So the authentication keys stayed in my encrypted drives, and the proprietary modules stayed buried in the code. Our protection against the next Julian, the next Thomas, the next Richard. One afternoon, I was in my office reviewing specs for a new security protocol when Monica knocked on my door. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Always." "What's up?" She sat down, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted to thank you for what you did." "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know, but when Julian was here, when he was questioning benefits and making those comments about unnecessary expenses, I knew he was talking about people like me. Trans healthcare, accommodation policies, all of it. He was going to cut everything that made this place safe for people who don't fit his narrow definition of valuable." "You're one of the most valuable people in this company," I said. "I know that, you know that. Amelia knows that, but Julian only saw an expense, and if you hadn't stopped him, I would have had to choose between my healthcare and my job. You never should have to make that choice. Most places, I do. That's why what you did mattered. You didn't just save Amelia's position. You saved what this company stands for." After she left, I sat thinking about what she'd said. I'd been so focused on the big picture, saving Amelia, stopping Julian, protecting Vortex, that I hadn't fully considered the individual impacts. Kyle, who needed flexible family leave. Monica, who needed inclusive health care. Zoe and the other developers who needed fair compensation and respect for their expertise. The hundreds of other employees who'd built their lives around a company that treated them like humans, not resources. That's what had really been at stake. Not just corporate control or founder rights, but the radical idea that a successful company could also be a good one. A week later, I was having coffee with Amelia at our usual spot across from the Vortex building. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Building the kill switch, I mean. Using it, do you regret fighting for the company?" "Never." "Then no, I don't regret it." Amelia stirred her espresso, thoughtful. "I've been thinking about succession planning. Real succession planning, not the Julian kind. We're not that old. We're not young either. And if we learned anything from this mess, it's that we need to be intentional about the company's future. Make sure it goes to people who share our values." She was right. We'd built something worth protecting, which meant we had to think beyond ourselves. Over the next year, we developed a real succession plan. We promoted Zoe to Senior VP of Engineering. Monica became Chief Security Officer. We brought up other longtime employees into leadership roles, people who'd proven they understood what Vortex stood for. We also restructured our equity. Instead of concentrating ownership, we distributed shares to employees at every level. Not enough to make everyone rich, but enough to give them real stake in the company's success. "We're building legacy," Amelia explained at the announcement. "Not just for us, but for everyone who's contributed to making Vortex what it is." The tech press covered our restructuring with interest. Several articles called it radical and unprecedented. One particularly cynical journalist suggested we were just trying to prevent another hostile takeover. He wasn't entirely wrong, but it was more than that. 2 years after the Julian incident, as it became known in company lore, I was invited to speak at a tech conference in Seattle. The topic was building sustainable tech companies in a quarter-driven world. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't my strength, and I didn't love the idea of telling our story to a room full of strangers. But Amelia convinced me. "People need to hear this," she said. "They need to know it's possible to build something good and protect it." So I went. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of tech professionals, I told them about Vortex. About starting in a garage with nothing but talent and determination. About building a company culture that valued people over profits. About the hostile board takeover and the kill switch that saved everything we'd built. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and it spread until the entire auditorium was on their feet. During the Q&A, a young woman in the third row raised her hand. "How do you balance protection with trust? Building a kill switch seems like you were planning for betrayal from the start." I said honestly. Not because I expected it, but because I'd seen it happen to other founders. My parents taught me to hope for the best but plan for the worst. The kill switch was planning for the worst. But doesn't that poison the culture if you're building in distrust from day one? The kill switch wasn't about distrusting our employees or our partners. It was about protecting them. When Julian and Thomas tried to tear apart everything we'd built, I didn't use the leverage for myself. I used it to restore Amelia, protect our people, and preserve our culture. Protection and trust aren't opposites. Sometimes protection is how you preserve trust. Another hand went up, a middle-aged man in a suit. You mentioned the systems were down for almost 24 hours. What about your clients? Didn't they suffer? They did, and that's the weight I had to carry. The decision to activate the kill switch affected hundreds of companies and thousands of people beyond Vortex. But here's the alternative I was facing. Let Julian and Thomas slowly destroy the company's capability through layoffs, outsourcing, and cost-cutting. Within a year, our service quality would have degraded permanently, and those same clients would have suffered long-term harm. 24 hours of disruption versus permanent degradation. I chose the option that protected long-term value. Did any clients leave after the outage? 3 out of 287. The rest accepted our explanation and appreciated our transparency. We told them exactly what happened. That leadership had made decisions that threatened the company's stability, and we'd taken action to correct course. Most of them respected that. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. When I finally left the stage, at least a dozen people wanted to talk more, to share their own stories of corporate betrayal or ask advice about protecting their companies. One young founder, couldn't have been more than 25, pulled me aside. "I'm building something with my co-founder," he said. "We're about to take on investors. Should I build a kill switch like you did?" I thought about that carefully. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this: understand what you're protecting and why. A kill switch isn't about power or control. It's about preserving something that matters more than any individual. If you're building something that matters, protect it. The specifics are up to you. He nodded and thanked me. Flying home that night, I thought about how far we'd come. 20 years from a garage to a billion-dollar company. Through growth and success, through betrayal and crisis, through destruction and restoration. My phone buzzed with a text from Amelia. "Zoe just pitched an amazing idea for our next-gen security platform. We should talk tomorrow." I smiled. This was what mattered. Not the drama or the corporate warfare, but the continuous work of building something meaningful. When I got back to the office the next day, there was a package on my desk. Inside was a framed photo. The original picture of Amelia and me from 20 years ago, standing in front of her garage, holding a handwritten sign that said Vortex Data Systems. We build better. There was a note attached in Amelia's handwriting. We still do. I hung the photo on my wall, right next to my window overlooking the city. That's the story of how a single line of code and a decade of planning saved everything I'd built from people who saw loyalty as weakness and employees as expenses. If this resonated with you, if you believe companies can be both successful and ethical, both profitable and principled, I'd love to have you subscribe. We're growing a community of people who think differently about business, about leadership, about what it means to build something that lasts. Hit that subscribe button and join us. Together, we can show that doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, it's strategically smart. Thanks for being here.